Since the Hamas attacks on October 7th and the subsequent war Israel is currently waging in Gaza, we at the Middle East Program have been speaking with various experts from within the Wilson Alum Network about their thoughts and analysis on ongoing developments from across the region. Israelis and Palestinians, Jordanians and Egyptians, and Lebanese experts, amongst other foreign policy experts in the United States that have worked in the Middle East. Our goal is to ensure that we are convening diverse voices to shed light on the various aspects of the war, the human toll and the dire humanitarian crisis, the economic impact, the military and security angle, as well as the implications for peace and security in the region. One of the emerging themes in a lot of these discussions is how disconnected Arabs and Israelis are from each other's trauma and pain. And there is pain and trauma on both sides. There are, however, voices of Arabs and Israelis that are coming together to stand for peace, security, and for justice, even amidst these very difficult times. So today, I'm delighted to be speaking with Alon-Lee Green, who is the co-director of Standing Together, a progressive grassroots movement in Israel established in 2015, which mobilizes people around issues of peace, equality, and social justice. Today, Standing Together, which includes Arabs and Jews in Israel, is working to ensure that all aid convoys are protected from settler attacks, for example, to ensure that the necessary humanitarian aid is reaching Palestinians in dire need, whether in the West Bank or in Gaza. So Alon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
If you can tell our policy audience a little bit more about your efforts and what is it like to be standing together during these extremely divisive times?
So Standing Together is a Jewish-Palestinian grassroots movement operating within the Israeli state, within Israel, around issues of peace and equality and social justice, with the goal to build enough power within our society to change our reality before October 7th, for sure after October 7th, to create a reality in which we are all benefiting from a different kind of order, a different kind of nature of things, while we understand that as much as it's very different, the price we are all paying right now from the current reality, especially after October 7th, of course, we understand Palestinians are paying the ultimate price. Palestinians are oppressed by our state, but Jewish people also pay a price. We pay a price of the fact that it's unsafe, that the violence is turned against us at times as well, a price of economy, a price of safety, a price of fearing for your child when they're sent to the army, and so on. So if we understand that we are all paying a different price, but we are all paying a price together in this reality, we also understand that we can benefit together from a different reality. And this reality that we are working towards it is a reality where all human beings that live on this land, Palestinians and Jews, 7 million here, 7 million there, that none of them are going anywhere. All of these people will live a free life, an independent life, and an equal life. This is the principles of the reality we are working for. And the lack of those things, as we understand it, is the source for the violence and the bloodshed that we're suffering from.
So how can you get more people to support your movement? These are extremely difficult times, given, as you very eloquently said, the very high price that both Palestinians and Israelis are paying for the current situation. And of course, we're currently in a war. At times of war, hearts and minds harden. So how are you able to mobilize more people to stand with you in this movement and stand for the values that you are representing?
Indeed, these are polarizing times. These are times where each person experienced a hardship or a trauma or fear, or more than that, death and casualties and grief and sorrow. It's an amazing experience to try and take a zoom out for a second in Israel and Palestine, and to understand that you can live sometimes in the same building, in a mixed city in Israel, for example, such as Jaffa or Haifa, where sometimes in the same building there will be a Palestinian family living and a Jewish family living, and you can see a person waking up in the morning, turning on their Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, seeing a very specific feed and news and videos and pictures. And then in the other apartment, a Palestinian person will wake up and will see very specific news and images and videos that will be the opposite from the Jewish person. And both of them will feel fear, both of them will feel trauma, both of them will feel they're right, both of them will fear the other. And bridging this gap is one of the hardest tasks possible. And it is the task we took upon ourselves to try and talk about the mutual interest, to try and talk about the mutual grief, the mutual loss, but also trying to reflect to our own society, which is the Israeli society. We do not represent people that live in Gaza or in the West Bank, only within the borders of Israel. Also to reflect to our society that we have a responsibility, for not killing innocent people, for not bombing hospitals or schools or universities or infrastructures, for not starving people, for supplying aid if we took control over Gaza. So there are hungry people there, people with no food, no water. So it's our responsibility. In a time where our government, or even let's say political forces within our society that are holding the government right now, but are deeper than just the government, because they hold also the settlements and they hold a lot of control over weapon industries and so on, are trying to push our society towards a very dark path of saying there are no innocent people in Gaza. It's a controversial thing to say right now, to say that they are innocent. When we say in billboards, and where we say in our protests, there are innocent people in Gaza, all the children in Gaza are innocent, I will get attacked because of that in the Israeli society, because ministers, prime minister himself, and parliament members, they will say, all the children of Gaza today are the terrorists of tomorrow. What do they mean? That you can spare them, that you can kill them. And I think that it is becoming a very, very difficult thing to understand that it's not only that we're fighting a war, an actual war on the ground, but we're actually fighting also a war over the soul of our society. Can we remain humane in the face of tragedy? Can we remain in solidarity with another person in the face of fear? Do we lose our humanity and say, after us, there will be only death and destruction? We do not want to be part of this society. We don't want to become this society. So this is why we choose to fight from within our society, with the empathy to our society, with the patriotism, to understand that it is not a fight for the Palestinians that live in Gaza only. It's also for them, but it's for us. It is for a question of how do we convince our society that it's better for us not to go down this path.
And how has the response been so far with all the different protests that you are organizing and the key messages that you're highlighting?
At the beginning, it was extremely difficult. On October 9th, we issued a statement. We already issued things on October 7th, but on October 9th, we issued a very big statement coming with a petition calling the Israeli public to support a deal, a hostage deal to release the hostages, saying that the war or a war will not release them, bombing Gaza will not release them, sending soldiers to occupy Gaza will not release them. The only way to release them is, unfortunately, even if you don't like it, to talk with Hamas and to reach a diplomatic agreement of a ceasefire, of a deal. And that was very unpopular. I mean, it got us attacks of even left-wing parliament members that attacked us. But next to it, more than 60,000 Israelis have signed our petition. Afterwards, in the month coming after October, we demonstrated saying, stop the war, ceasefire, and so on. And it was tough to get the responses, sometimes death wishes, death threats. We had to evacuate our offices. The police told us, we see the threats. We know that it is very dangerous for you. They asked a few of us to leave our houses and apartments, but they say we can't help you. So just evacuate yourself. It was very tough.
Yeah, that is a very difficult situation. But despite these difficulties, you carried on. And I think one of the most impressive successes that is important to highlight is how you have been protecting some of the aid convoys that have been attacked by right-wing settlers. Can you tell us a little bit more about this particular group of people that you're organizing to protect aid convoys and how this is coming about?
So for some months and long weeks, the organized settlers groups have organized buses from the West Bank, from the settlements on the West Bank, to come to the Gaza border and to block the aid, just standing as a human, block and not allowing the aid truck to pass into Gaza. We answered that with organizing food convoys, called upon Israeli citizens to donate food and supplies, women's supplies, baby supplies, food, flour, pastas, and so on, to come to bring it to our offices across the country or apartments across the country. And we organized a convoy of a truck and 40 cars week after week trying to reach Gaza. At the same time, the settlers were there blocking the trucks. The army told us that we cannot get closer than 3 or 10 kilometers, depending on the time, to Gaza. And it was like amazing that we are not allowed to bring food to people, but they're allowed to block aid that is actually coordinated with the army. Then we tried different tactics. We tried to go to a public campaign telling the public that starvation or starving people is not the human thing to do. It's not the Jewish thing to do. And it does not serve us. Not only that it's starving real people, real children, but it's actually hurting us. And then a few weeks ago, when we saw that the settlers escalated their tactics into really looting those aid trucks, setting them on fire, sending Palestinian truck drivers to the hospital, we said, okay, this is not something we can continue with normal means. We need to organize and bring ourselves as a shield between those drivers and trucks and food and the settlers that are trying to attack them. And we called for our supporters to volunteer at least one shift a week to the humanitarian guard. More than 1,000 people volunteered and came up and said, this is the shift I'm going to take. And we started sending shifts of guards, of dozens of people at the same time, building on two tactics. One tactic was that we need to be in bigger numbers than the settlers. So we learned, we got into their WhatsApp groups, into their forums. We learned how much people they're able to mobilize, and we made sure that we're mobilizing at least double the people to the checkpoints and crossroads across the West Bank where the trucks were driving. The second thing was we gambled on our assumption that the police that stood aside and allowed the settlers to attack the aid convoys and trucks and drivers will not actually stand aside when it will be Israeli citizens clashing with other Israeli citizens, us versus the settlers, and that our presence there will force the police to interfere and to show up. We have videos, for example, from the week before we started our activity with the humanitarian guard of looting trucks, setting them on fire, an event that took 8 to 10 hours, and we see the police officers standing and some soldiers standing there, and the event continues. No backup, no more forces, no arrests.
Why
We
do you
recognize
why do you think the security forces were standing aside?
we lost the police in Israel. We literally lost the police to Ben Gvir. He took over the entire chain of command in the police. He fired now the head of the police. And if you want to become high-rank officer or the head of the police, you need to go through an interview with Ben Gvir, and you need to actually be, in his favor, and he needs to favor you. So it creates some kind of a correcting behavior for the people that are in charge. They don't need to get a direct command from Ben Gvir, which he also gives. We have a lot of articles and research that show that he interferes in their ongoing work, but is actually creating a self-correcting behavior for a lot of the high rank officers. And they chose not to interfere. As I said, we recognized in those videos the faces and names of 20 different people that we know to their name, where they're from, and we can show that they've been in the video of looting or setting fire, of acting, criminally and committing a felony. If we can recognize those people, we can assume the police can recognize them as well. But not one person was arrested. 4 weeks after we're talking them. So we kind of said, okay, this they don't want to do. But will they allow 70 left-wing activists clashing with 30 settlers with knives? The settlers bring a knife to this thing. Will they allow it? We assumed and gambled that they were not going to let it happen. And we were right. They started sending police cars, and they started showing up in these events when we came. Yeah, and that's how we won.
Well, those are, I think, very noble and very important efforts, and it's important for our policy audience to hear that there are such efforts on the ground between Israelis and Palestinians. So my last question will focus on President Biden's speech on Friday, which outlined a three-phased approach to ending the war in Gaza, and starting a process to also rebuild Gaza. Of course, we're nowhere near that right now, and we've also heard from the Israeli government and the Prime Minister push back a little bit on this particular plan. But of course, this plan includes a hostage deal, a temporary ceasefire that will eventually lead to a permanent ceasefire. So where does your movement stand on this particular plan?
We actually raised money to go tomorrow morning with a full-on billboard campaign across the country, bus stops, billboards, posters in the bridges, to say, how will I translate it to English? Accept the deal and the war now. And the now refers also to the big protest that we're part of its leadership, to say release them all now. And it is very unfortunate, honestly, that there is no opposition in Israel that cares enough to create competition and to have the courage to step in front of us, the public, and tell us there's no other way to release the hostages but ending this war, but achieving a ceasefire agreement, because Egypt says so, Qatar says so, Hamas, of course, demands it, but also the president of the United States of America said that you need to end this war in order to reach this deal. And the complete argument with Israel, that is, it's not a direct argument, but the entire political system, from left to the right wing, are saying, of course, we can't end the war, but we need to release the hostages. How are you planning to do so? 8 months of war, released 3 hostages alive, but killed at least 5 that we know of. We all assume that more hostages were killed by Israeli fire than 5. 8 days of a temporary ceasefire with Hamas agreed ceasefire with Hamas, the last and only deal, released 108 hostages in 8 days. I think the numbers are speaking for themselves. And I think that it is an obvious thing that the head of the opposition in Israel, maybe the president of Israel, Herzog, or some opposition leader should, not us, instead of us, should come to the public and say, we need to accept it. That's the best we're going to get. Otherwise, it's an internal war. Otherwise, we're stuck conquering Gaza, and who knows what will happen. Do we agree to sacrifice our sons and daughters as soldiers for the never-ending occupation of Gaza? Do we have an alternative of who is going to take charge? 8 months of war have only killed, what, 1/3 of the Hamas fighters, according to the US intelligence report. So what is going to happen? No one is brave enough to come forward and tell us. So we say, okay, this is the time to tell the public, we need to end the war and accept this deal. So if you want our position, that's our position. But of course, we're also criticizing the US administration in some levels of their lack of ability to put a real red line to Netanyahu during this war. Of course, we understand that this deal is really far from being perfect. It's not an American deal, by the way. It's a deal of Israel and Hamas. Of course, we understand that it's not perfect. Of course, it misses the part of talking about the day after Hamas and who will be able to replace Hamas. But right now, we need to work with what we have and to kind of pave a way forward. Otherwise, we will be not only stuck in this terrible place, but we are destroying the fact for a different future than bloodshed and violence. And it is a very, very worrying thing to try and think what is going to happen there if we will not reach a ceasefire really, really soon.
Thank you so much once again for your time, Alon, and for all the work that you are doing. And we hope to continue the conversation, hopefully during better times. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.